Happy Sabbath, guys, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well and that you've had a great week. I thought to come on here today to share with you guys something that has been on my heart that I believe God has been telling me to share with the hopes of encouraging someone else. It's something that I'm truly grateful for, and I hope that it helps you in your walk with God as it has helped me. It is something that happened recently, just this year. And yeah, I think it's really transforming how I look at God and how I approach situations that I'd typically be afraid of. So, as many of you may know by now, I work as a research technician in a cancer research lab. And I've been working in that position for just over a year now. And I really like what I do. I really enjoy my job, and as it so happens, I have my own project at work. I have my own research topic and everything. But yeah, so like I mentioned, as of last year in December, on the 5th, I clocked 1 year in my position. And shortly after that time, my boss was going on leave, on a 6-week leave. And so before he left, we had conversations about like experiments that I would want to work on during that period. And he gave his input on like experiments that he thinks that I should also like add on. And we created a plan for the 6 weeks that he would be away for. And so I was pretty enthusiastic about everything, and I made up my plan as to, when I would do certain experiments and whatnot for the 6 weeks. And I was very optimistic that, by the time my boss would be returning, I would have a ton of results, from the experiments. And things would just go forward, and yeah, things would progress with my project in that way. And so, yeah, he left for his break, and, I started working with these experiments. Mind you, the first experiments were necessary for me to conduct the remaining experiments. I needed to have a positive result in order for me to proceed with the other ton of experiments I had to conduct for that period. And so on the surface, it seemed like, a simple thing. It's something that I've done before. If you're familiar with proliferation assays, in short, I could explain it as an assay or an experiment that you do in which you monitor growth of cells in different conditions that you set up, different media conditions, whether you add drugs or whether you're just determining how cells grow in, say, plus or minus lipids media, or if you're looking at how cells grow in glucose enriched or glucose depleted media, whatever it is, you're monitoring cell growth. You're setting up a proliferation assay. And so it was a simple proliferation assay experiment. I was doing a drug titration. And so I figured, oh, this is going to be simple. It's something that I do quite often, except that I was working with a set of new drugs. But anyway, I thought it was something that would turn out to be pretty simple. That was not the case. The assay was not working. Things were just not working, as well as I was hoping they would. And I tried to troubleshoot the experiment so many times, tried to optimize the conditions. It wasn't working. Time was going, and it was somewhat stressing me out because, I had conversations with my boss about it during the time of his break to say, these are the results that I'm getting. And he suggested one thing that I could, troubleshoot with. And I did that. I did everything I could to optimize the experiment, talked to some of my colleagues. Nothing was working. And so that was a major setback for me because I had a ton of other experiments that were dependent on this one set of experiments to work well, and I needed to get a triplicate of biological replicates, or I needed to have it done like 3 times to be certain that my result was consistent and valid before I could proceed with my other experiments. And it was not working. Nothing was working. And so, before I knew it, the 6 weeks was almost up. And I was just very discouraged during that period. That was the one period since I started working in this position where things have not worked out for me. Granted, I had known during that time, where I had been made aware of the fact that things like this do happen, especially in grad school. You could go for months, where none of your experiments are working or you're not getting good results. It happens. And so in my mind, I was thinking, okay, this is something that's, preparing me for that period when maybe in the future things are not working. So this is now my time to experience this, and I have to push through. But a part of me was just disappointed that, my boss would be returning, from his leave to find that, none of my experiments pretty much worked during the time that he was away. That in itself was disappointing. And yeah, a part of me felt like, the fact that things didn't work in his absence on my end, despite everything I did, to try to optimize my experiment, would cause him to change his perception of me as a scientist. And, granted, I will mention to say, like, my boss is a blessing. He is, I couldn't have imagined a better boss. He is a true blessing from God. My job in itself has been such an amazing blessing, from God, because it's much better than anything I could have imagined. And to have a boss as nice and as approachable as he is, I'm very thankful for that. But regardless of that, I was still afraid. In part, it didn't even make sense. He had never given me reason to think that he would have, such an explosive reaction to things. But for whatever reason, I was still afraid. I was still afraid of, what unspoken change in his perception of me as a scientist would be. Like, I was just afraid. I didn't know, and I was really anxious for his returning, but anyway, I prayed about it. And even when I prayed about it, a part of me was still nervous about it. But anyway, the day came, he arrived, and we had a one-on-one meeting. And even then, I was just praying that God would help me, even if he, for whatever reason, is not understanding of the circumstances I was in. I prayed that God would help me be able to handle the response. Even if they had never given me reason to think like that, but that was just those are my feelings at the moment. And I prayed also that, God would help me find favor in my boss's eyes, so that, I don't get to receive a negative response. And the reason why I even prayed for that, as you guys know, I started reading the Bible from scratch. Initially, I wanted to read the book of Proverbs, and so I read that first. But I started from Genesis again, and now I am in Exodus, specifically chapter 22 of Exodus. But the reason why I asked for favor is because I was inspired by the story of the Israelites whilst they were still in Egypt. There is a part that talks about how the Israelites had gained favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. And so it was something that really inspired me about how at the time, the Egyptians and the Israelites didn't really have a good relationship. The Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians. But God had made it so that the Israelites had found favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And not to say that that is the exact relationship I have with my boss, but it just inspired me to say that, you know what, God has power enough to give you favor, grant you favor in the eyes of those who even do harm to you. What more people who don't wish to do harm to you? So that's why I prayed for that. But anyway, so I get into the office, we have a one-on-one, and he's just like, oh no, that's okay. Actually, that experiment was not really the priority, so you could focus on these experiments because they were. He just shrugged it off, which is honestly typical from, because like I said, my boss is such a blessing. He is such a good mentor, and boss. So yeah, he was just like, oh, it's not a priority, it's okay, it happens. So just focus on these other experiments and da da da. So I was like, oh, I was so grateful for that. It definitely helped alleviate, that stress from me. But yeah, so started to move on. Just shortly after that, my boss comes to find me over lunch, and he asks me, he says, oh, we're gonna have rotation soon for the graduate students, because where I work is also attached to a grad school. And so he said, yeah, we're gonna have rotation soon, and I was wondering if you would be okay with like mentoring a graduate student. I said like, yeah, sure, I'm definitely fine with that. I'd be happy to. He's like, oh yeah, I just wanted to make sure you'd be good with that. And yeah, so that's great. I'll set that up. She'll be joining our lab in March. That was in February when he came back, and he asked me early February, and he asked me about that. I was in shock. I really was in shock because, like I had mentioned earlier, since I started working in my current position, I haven't had a period as difficult or as unproductive with respect to just like getting good results as I did then. That was my worst period, since I started working. And so for that to be followed up in the moment of me thinking, you know what, I don't know what's going on, a part of me started to even question myself, my skill set, and my confidence. The fact that right in the midst of me thinking, oh, right after the worst period, my boss then asked me to mentor a grad student. I was so humbled. In that moment, my initial thought was, wow, God. Wow. Even now, I'm so amazed by that, because but I was also just thankful that, that period, that 6-week period, the fact that things didn't work out, it's like, yeah, my boss understands. He went through grad school, he went through all that. Probably had periods like that where things were not working. But it's also just like, it made me feel like God really had answered my prayer. But in addition to that, it just shocked me how that 6-week period was not sufficient to erase any confidence, my boss had in me in terms of what I could deliver, as well as me being able to show that to someone else. It really touched me, and I really thanked God for that, because it was something I never expected, at all. And it really comforted me and made me feel like, you know what, God, you really do have my back, and you really are here to also just reaffirm me. Say like, yeah, don't lose your confidence. You have me to rely on. You have me to count on, and I will defend you. So fast forward, the month of February goes by, and in that period, I have another set of experiments that is just not working. It was not working. So this was a kind of experiment that I was doing to re-express a wild type gene in knockout cells. So knockout cells are cells in which, like, you have genes, you have your DNA. You could use a method called CRISPR to delete or eliminate a certain gene so that it is no longer present, or you make it inactive. Knockout, you delete a certain gene, so whatever your cells don't have that gene present, but you could re-express that specific gene that was deleted in those cells through a technique called, this was the technique I was using, through a lentiviral transfection. I will not get into the nitty-gritties, but anyway, I was trying to re-express a gene in my cells, and it was just not working. And I could tell that because typically you use an antibiotic for which you do a selection process. So the cells that remain alive, or the cells that keep growing, to say, oh, they have the re-expressed gene, because the plasmid typically has a part that codes for resistance to a certain antibiotic. So if you add that antibiotic onto your cells and it kills certain cells, but some still live, you know that they successfully got the plasmid. They are re-expressing, they're expressing that plasmid or that gene that you desire. And it was not working. Like, all the cells were growing, which you don't want, and so I tried to determine whether this would happen in actual wild type cells with that antibiotic. Would they die for this particular cell line? They were not dying, and I couldn't understand. I spoke with my workmates, I spoke with the research scientists, asked, I don't understand what's going on. No one had an answer for things. And at the time, I was just like, I really don't know what's going on. I can't make sense out of it. I talked to my boss about it, eventually. And at the time, I had already tried different concentrations. I had really upped the concentration of the antibiotic I was using way beyond what literature suggests. The cells were not dying, which didn't make sense to a lot of people. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to the scientists. It didn't make sense to my boss. Until we then determined, and by the way, I should say that, in that time, it was affecting my confidence again. Already, my confidence had been knocked down during that 6-week period. And then I have this other experiment, this new and big experiment to get through. Other experiments are relying on this experiment, and it's not working again. I was just like, God, I'm not understanding. Things are just not working. Is it me? But at the same time, I knew myself enough to know that I'm very meticulous in what I do. And so I was just like, I don't understand why things are not working, and it was affecting my confidence, but yeah, until I talked to my boss, we had a conversation about it. Come to find out, the cells were the issue. So the cells naturally do have resistance to this selection antibiotic that I was using, because they express this antigen. They express ova, what's called ova. But yeah, and that ova has resistance, neomycin resistance. And so I was truly thankful, because it was such a huge sigh of relief to know that, okay, it wasn't something I was doing. It was something to do with the cells. No matter what I could have done, it would not have worked. So just having that realization to say, oh, the cells already have resistance to this, so we need to approach this differently, was really great. But already my stress levels were up here, because I was just like, okay, things are not working out and no one seems to know why, but I was glad that was resolved. Unfortunately, it really felt like a lot of these things were happening back to back. And right after that, I believe the week after that, was last week actually, when my mentee was starting in our lab. Now, this past week, my mentee was starting on a Monday. I had a presentation on the Tuesday to pitch an idea for something I could do on my project. I was also presenting during our lab meeting. I'm presenting my project in its entirety, just so the students in our lab, the rotation students, could understand the projects that are going on in the lab. But that in itself was something else I had to prepare for. I also had 3 to 4 experiments, going on that week that I had to set up for. In addition to that, I had an in vivo mouse experiment, a big experiment that needed to have tumors injected that week. Last week was my most hectic week in terms of just the things that I had to accomplish, in addition to having a student come on board. Mind you, even when my boss asked me about mentoring a student, I was happy to do so. Not just because I was humbled by it, given the timeline of everything that was going on, but also the fact that I genuinely enjoy mentoring. I really enjoy mentoring. I enjoy teaching. There are things that just bring me so much joy and satisfaction. And so, yes, I was really looking forward to the students starting, but just with everything that had been going on so back to back, and the demand of the tasks that I had that week, I was feeling really anxious about everything. I really didn't know if I could meet the demands of the challenges. I just didn't know, and I was very scared. I was very scared. The beginning of that week, that Monday, I just didn't think I was going to be able to make it, And like I had mentioned earlier, just with everything that was happening prior to that, they had really taken a toll on my confidence. And I'm really grateful that, certain things, were resolved, and I got answers say, oh, this was what was going on. It wasn't necessarily because of you or your skill set. I'm really glad that I got, in a sense, some sort of closure from those things. But it had been what felt like periods of time going by before I could get that closure. And during that time was chipping away, at my confidence. And then now I have this big week, and it was a lot. And I was really scared. I didn't know if I could make it, honestly. And yeah, I didn't know if I had it in me, But then I came across this verse. It actually popped up through my YouVersion app. Psalms 56 verse 3. It's a very short verse. I strongly encourage you to memorize it. It says, whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. I encourage you to read the whole chapter. I read the whole chapter, and at the time when I was reading that chapter, I resonated with it so well. And it just really touched me to say, right when I needed this, God made a provision for me to be able to see it and read it, But yeah, Psalm 56 verse 3, read it, memorize it. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust you. I went into that week with that verse in mind. That was what I kept repeating to myself. And as you see, today is the 16th of March, and I am here. I made it through that week. And when I tell you, by that Friday, I was telling myself already, I made it through this week because of God. There was nothing in me that could have gotten me through that week except for God. It was purely God, and everything went smoothly. Everything that I was afraid of going south, everything went well. One of the biggest lessons that I have learned from that week was my fears, the anxiety that I was experiencing more so came from the fact that I was relying on my own strengths and I didn't even realize it. The knocking down of my confidence because those experiments were not working, just how that affected me was because without me even realizing it, I was so dependent on my skill set and the fact that, oh, things worked well for me, the fact that I could get results in a certain time. And granted, it's great to push yourself. It's great to know that you are a consistent person and that your results are reliable. But it really showed me to say that I must recognize the source of those strengths. I must recognize the one in whom I can truly rely on. Because if I am relying on myself, the moment something goes wrong, my confidence, is already dipping. But if I really depend on God solely for everything, even if things go sour, I know who to turn to without it affecting my whole demeanor. And that was such a huge, huge lesson to me, even coming into this week. That's right. This week was lighter. This week was definitely lighter, but I still had a bunch of things on my plate to do. But it really helped me know how to address things that had made me really scared, things that made me really anxious, because it taught me to say, I must trust God. I am nothing without God. The skill set that I have, I must trust God. For me to even be able to build it, for me to do anything, it's really God. And so I tell you all this to encourage you to say, trust God, be it your career, your relationships, your everything. Trust God. He will really come through for you. He came through for me, and there is nothing so special about me that he would come through for me and not you. I strongly encourage you to trust God, because the God that I have experienced in the past few weeks and months, and to be fair with you, when I look back on my life, God has been so consistent in my life and has shown me such great favor, because some of the things that I've gotten to experience, it's not because of anything special that I've done. It really isn't. But God has been so good and so kind to me. And, these few weeks, these past weeks or months have been so important to me, but I've been so scared. My confidence has been knocked down, as I have told you, in this video. But God really came through for me, and he showed me just how kind and loving he is, and that he really listens. He really listens to my prayers. Another thing that I will share with you that I've noticed. So I may have mentioned in a previous video about how I have started scheduling my time when it comes to dedicating time with God. So in the mornings, I believe I have the time block from 5:30 to 6 a.m. That is my devotional time. In the evening, I have the time block from 8:50 p.m. to 9:20. The evenings, I would say, is my more consistent time. There are times in the mornings when I'm just so tired, I'm unable to get through a devotion in the morning, or to wake up in good time to have a devotion in the morning. But what I do my best to do is, even if I don't have it in the morning, I have to have devotion in the evening, And I'll be honest with you, there are times I've fallen short with that. But one thing that I have noticed is, when I consistently started with my devotions, I started first with the evenings before I even set up a time in the morning. And so I set up from 8:50 to 9:20. 8:50 to 9:20, I'd have that as my praise and worship time, as well as my devotion, where I just read the Bible and I have my book and I, write out what I'm learning and the things that I'm reading and whatever I want to memorize. I have that time block. When that time would come, and I'm sorry, I'm saying all these things at a time. One thing that I make it a point to do when I am having my devotion time is I pray for the Holy Spirit to fill up my apartment, to fill up this space, and I pray for the angels of God to surround my apartment, the complex, everything. I ask for practically heaven to come down and for God to really be with me, to really help me understand what I'm reading and get out of the Bible what God intends for me to get out. I always pray for that whenever I have my devotion. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is my time, 8:50, 9:20. I have to stick to 8:50, 9:20. What I did not realize, funny enough, is that God also respects that time. Like the time that I ask for him to be, he also has it in mind to say that 8:50 to 9:20 is a special time for me to spend with her. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this make me emotional, but I didn't realize that, that was something that God would also care about, to say this is time to spend with her. I literally feel it now. I don't know how else to explain that, but I literally feel the change in the atmosphere in my apartment at 8:50. No matter what I'm doing, if I'm running late, I literally feel the change in my apartment. And that was what got me to learn to say God really respects my time. He respects the time that I say 8:50 is the time that I've put to spend with you, and he makes his presence known. That really touched me, because I was like, wow, a God so big would take the time to say, he really listens, you guys. He really listens. So I strongly encourage you to take this seriously. Take God seriously. Make it a point to really start working on your walk with God. I am learning the characteristics of God in that he is truly kind. He has been very kind to me so far. I have not been disappointed in that regard. But he also respects my time that is a gift from him, in fact. But he respects it, and he listens. I have no reason to be afraid, because he has shown time and time again he's got my back. So I really had it on my heart for some days now. I think since last week, end of last week, which is when a lot of this stuff happened. I've had it on my heart to share this message with you. And so I really hope that it brings encouragement, especially to any one of you who may be feeling afraid. You may be feeling scared that you wouldn't be able to rise up to the occasion, or you feel alone, but God really does come through, and you are not alone. You don't have to face whatever you're facing by yourself. God will help you. He will strengthen you, and he will get you through whatever it is that you're going through. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. Psalms 56, verse 3. Please memorize that. Please memorize that and have it engraved on your heart, because it has really, truly helped me. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the Sabbath and that you have a great start to your week. And I am truly praying for you guys Whoever is watching or listening to the sound of my voice, I pray for you that God really shows up for you in this moment of your life. I pray that God helps you through whatever it is that you may be going through, whatever fears you may have, whatever doubts you may have. I pray that God makes his presence known to you in your life. Take care, guys. Bye.